So if someone comes to you at the Free Market Foundation and says, South Africa is going to be the next Zimbabwe, what do you say? Do you say yes or no, or somewhere in between?
Yeah, I guess the answer is maybe a bit of a hedge, but it depends, right? And I think it depends on the choices that we make. So South Africa has the potential to be a prosperous, cosmopolitan, successful economy and society. But I think it's also very important to know that we could go down the Zimbabwe route, and many of the ingredients that formed the basis for the chaos and destruction that we saw in Zimbabwe have been evident in South Africa. So I don't think it is a remote risk. Yes, we have these different poles of power. We have a free media, we have the courts, we have civil society, we have a strong business community, but those, are not invincible. And as we were discussing earlier, there's been enormous political pressure brought to bear on, for example, the courts. So, we can't take that for granted. And I think we need to use the Zimbabwe example as a cautionary tale of what could go wrong. And when the Mugabe regime violated private property rights, that set in motion a series of events that led to the immiseration of the Zimbabwean people and the destruction of a once vibrant agricultural sector there.
I want to ask you about that, and I don't think you can answer without speculating because we don't know. I want to ask you what's happening in the minds of someone else. But the examples are so obvious that many of these policy ideas wouldn't work. You don't need to spend, you don't need to do a thorough research. It's obvious that this confiscation of property, excessive centralization in the government, a government that is already failing. But those who are pushing for this don't seem to be very much concerned about what's happening and what has been happening all over the world in the last century. So the question is, why do they keep pursuing this if it's so obvious? I think we've, in a sense, already gotten past the point where we need to explain that expropriation without compensation would be bad for the economy. I think a lot of people people sort of know it's bad. You would find people in the government who would sort of try to argue that it's good, but I'm not so sure that they are convinced that it would be good. I don't know, but how do you make sense of this?
Well, I think it's within the interests of the political elite to pursue those policies. That doesn't mean it's necessarily a good thing for the country itself. And so there is that link of accountability has been broken. It's the same with BEE. BEE enriches a small, narrow elite. It hasn't done what it is claimed to do, which is to transform the economic conditions of ordinary black South Africans. It's created through political patronage, a kind of a system of interests that are linked to state power, that is essentially the politicization of the economy. So I think if you look again at the Zimbabwean example, the ZANU-PF elite did pretty well. Their lifestyle was actually pretty good, even though the economy was suffering from famine and disease, and the immiseration of ordinary Zimbabweans was very extreme. I mean, Mugabe in his later years was having surgery in Singapore, very high expense. So I think there's often this assumption, perhaps a naive one, that politicians are always acting in the national interest, but that's not always the case. I think their interests are far narrower. They're serving a very specific, narrow constituency. We often hear ANC leaders talking about our people, and not necessarily all South Africans. And so that is a signal to their constituency, like, hey, we're defending your interests, and our interests are aligned. And part of that is also about scapegoating others.
Yes, but we're defending your interest, but it's in rhetoric only, because as you mentioned, black economic empowerment. There's really a small elite, and it's not some conspiracy. You can just see it happening. There's really a small elite that is benefiting from this. Black South Africans aren't benefiting from it, but they are so hell-bent on continuing with these policies. And I think part of the reason is because it would be bad for them if the policies were to stop. It wouldn't be bad for people living in South Africa. It wouldn't be bad for black South Africans. It would be bad for the ones who are deciding on the policy. That's what it seems like.
Yeah.